Hello, Okumu John is my name. I and my colleagues are going to discuss for you a topic called Public Sector Comparator. In short, PSC. That is, we are going to illustrate for you the working of PSC in undertaking value for money analysis. And we shall also look at the weaknesses of PSC in assessing for value for money analysis and provide suggestions how we can reduce the weaknesses that reside with the adoption of PSC as a tool for assessing value for money proposition for the delivering either of public infrastructure or services under the public-private partnership arrangement. We are 6 in number: myself, Okumu John, Wasagale Lillian, Picho Okelo, Gerard Dusabe, Kauka Ronald Edward, Micho Mugerwa. Our presentation outline. We are going to give you the purpose and definition of public sector comparator, components of PSC, value of risk, characteristics of public procurement, PSC stages and principles, risk metrics and risk allocation, case study of Kampala Waste Management PPP project, weaknesses of PSC in assessing value for money, suggestions how to reduce the weaknesses of PSC, and lastly, with conclusion. We all know that public-private partnerships are arrangements between the government and private sector for the purposes of providing public infrastructure, community facilities, and services. The private sector enter into a contract with the government for the design, delivery, and operation of the infrastructure or facility and services provided. The private sector also finance the capital investment of the facility or services and thereafter recover their investment during the contract period. At the end of the contract, the private sector hands over the asset to the government, which in this case is the public sector. So, what is a public sector comparator? We are going to give you a definition from World Bank. The World Bank says the PSC estimates the hypothetical risk-adjusted cost of a project if it were to be financed, owned, and implemented by the government. PSC provides a benchmark for estimating value for money from alternative bids. In this definition, we see that value for money is very key here. So what is value for money in PPP? African Development Bank defines value for money as it is gained through the engagement of private sector efficiency, effectiveness, and economy through the appreciation of the risk in the project. The assessment of the potential to secure value for money is a key element of the PPP assessment process. The conclusion on value for money potential will inform government in developing member countries on whether to proceed with a PPP procurement, and if so, the form of PPP that will be used. So what is the purpose of a PSC? A PSC is used by government to make decisions by testing whether a private investment proposal offers value for money in comparison with the most efficient form of public procurement. In a nutshell, it provides a benchmark for estimating value for money. Thank you.
Hello, Peter Keller is my name. Let's look at the components of PSC. Component number 1 is raw PSC, which includes all the capital and operating costs that affect the reference project. Examples of some of these costs include land purchase or lease costs, and also operating costs like costs of raw materials or reagents that are used by the plant equipment and facilities. Component number 2 is competitive neutrality, which involves every cost adjustment that is made to remove net competitive advantages that government businesses enjoy over private sector businesses, like non-payment of insurance premiums or non-payment of certain taxes like land tax by government businesses. Component number 3 is transferable risk, which deals with all the value of risks that government deems necessary to transfer to the private sector due to the private sector's unique abilities to best handle these risks, which includes the innovativeness, efficiency, effectiveness, and also flexibility. Component number 4 is retained risks, which includes all the value of risks that are retained by government due to its ability to best handle this kind of risks, like the possibilities of demand for public services and also security risk guarantees. Next, we're going to look at the value of risk. First of all, risk is the uncertainty as to the amount of benefits, which includes all potential for financial gain or financial exposure to loss in the project. Risk, therefore, is an inherent part of any project. In the context of PSC, it reflects the potential for cost overruns or revenue shortfalls against the raw PSC. Therefore, for PSC to provide a meaningful test for value for money against private sector bids, it must include comprehensive and realistic pricing of all quantifiable and material risks. There are two essential elements of risk. One, risk is a cost, therefore there is financial implication on the risk. It is also a possibility and not a certainty. That means it might occur or it may not occur. Therefore, contingency measures need to be put in place in case it occurs. One thing to note is uncertainty makes it difficult to identify and estimate the cost of risks. Therefore, the procurement team must do its best to identify all possible risks that could occur and affect the overall cost of the reference project. Next, let's look at what's the nature of public sector procurement. Procurements in public sector tend not to value risk. Therefore, budgets for projects are often optimistic, and also there is a tendency for the budgets to consider the best possible, least cost and earliest completion outcome. This therefore means it doesn't factor in possible delays in project deliveries and also the possibility of undervaluation of costs in the project. It's therefore important for the estimates in the costs to reflect the most likely outcome. That means they need to factor in risks. It's also important to note that private sector generally includes risks in its cost estimates. Therefore, when government is considering allocation of risks to the private sector, it must ensure that it doesn't transfer too many risks to the private sector. Otherwise, the private sector might insure itself against all those risks by demanding a higher premium, which will eventually affect the value for money on the project.
Hello, colleagues. My name is Jed Seven. I'll be discussing the PSC stages and principles as part of our case study for Kampala Waste Management Project. In this case study and in this area, I'm going to discuss, I'll look at capital costs, the operating costs, then the projected revenues, then the risk matrix, the discounted cash flow, and also we shall have to discuss about the sensitivity analysis. Colleagues, allow me to talk about capital costs. Capital costs, these are costs that are incurred irrespective of whether the project has started generating revenues or not. In this PPP of Kampala Waste Management Project, the capital costs will include the fleet that will be necessary to do the implementation of the work. Then we look at the operating costs. Now we are looking at these costs that are necessary for the daily operations. Of course, these would include the laborers' payment, cost of fuel, cost of repairs and maintenance. Remember, our PPP of Kampala Waste Management Project is being implemented in the phase of waste collection, then the next phase of waste management. Then also we look at the revenue streams, and under revenue streams, how is the agreement or how is the arrangement in as far as collecting this revenue? Yes, how are we going to collect this revenue? Is it by check, by AT? Are we going to get a designated agent to collect these revenues? So it will also be discussed. Then we look at the risk and sensitivity analysis. In discussing risk, we look at the probability that certain events may happen and they may impair the progress of the project. Under risk, we shall have to look at, yes, the likelihood of these risks occurring and the various impact or the possible impact on the project. And then the public sector entity and the private player will come out with mitigation measures. So it is one of the stages that must be considered. Then, as far as sensitivity analysis, we are looking at the cash flows and assumptions and what would affect in these assumptions, what may change. So when you look at sensitivity analysis, remember, as the PPP arrangement is being undertaken, we must consider how is revenue going to be generated. Even before, you're supposed to calculate what is the present value of the future projected cash flows. So this will enable whether the project is worthwhile or not. Colleagues, allow me to stop here and give my colleagues room to proceed with the next slides. Thanks for listening to me. God bless you.
I'm Lilian Wasagali, and I'll be taking you through Kampala Waste Management Public-Private Partnership Project. In 2012, Kampala Capital City Authority took steps to improve the solid waste management services in the city through engagement of the private sector with a vision a city all Ugandans can be proud of under a PPP modality project. In order to improve efficiency in solid waste management, to have proper waste collection, disposal, sorting, processing, and recycling, and to enjoy other benefits that come from proper waste management, unlike what has been happening at the landfill in Kitezi. To reduce the fiscal burden of building new infrastructure, the International Financial Corporation was hired to provide the transaction advisory services. The key details of the project, you have table below that shows a hypothetical base cost incurred in the project delivery. All figures are expressed in the net present cost terms, reflecting cost. Revenues assumed over the period of 15 years term, assuming a nominal discount rate of 10% based on a real pre-tax rate of 14.4% and inflation assumption of 10%. The table below shows the best costs of delivering the project. So we have the direct and indirect costs. We have direct costs such as the land that we were acquiring in Mukono, the construction cost, for example, the raw materials that is cement at 139.6 NPC, and we have consultancy expertise that we are drawing from other countries, for example, Sweden, that has over 4.4 tons of waste, but only dispose 1%, and we have it at 1.0%. And then we have plant and equipment, that is, for example, the transportation vehicles that we shall be using in the containers for disposal. We have direct costs that affect the critical path of the project, that is the construction overheads at 2.0. We have the competitive neutrality that the government enjoys for being a public and the private enjoys advantages for being private. For example, the government does not pay land tax. And then we have the retained risk. Retained risk is basically the risk that the government will have to incur in a bid that you have a PPP modality, and they will have to incur that cost. And then the transferred risk is basically the risk that and the cost that the government will pay for being in a PPP, which is at 100% risk adjusted total risks retained. Then we have sensitivity analysis, that is the effect of the movement of the main components of risk adjusted PSC, so as to understand the effect of the movement in the cost towards the project. The general release is the comparison of the bids to identify the changes in the best assumptions, which could result into different evaluation decisions being reached. We take an example: 5% increase in capital will mean a reduction in operating costs, for example, the construction costs. Then if we have an increase in the capital, a deduction in the capital, it will mean an increase in the operating costs. We look at the hypothetical analysis of public sector comparator in value for money. It's clearly illustrated here, where we draw the comparison, the PA that offer, and we make the decision if we are to offer the public procurement way or we are going to offer it under PPP modality. So we take a look at the direct and indirect costs under PPP modality, and under public we have a total of 207.3 under public, and we have under bidder 2 at 219.6. So we look at the transferred risk, the retained risk, and the total value for money is 98.5 under bidder 1, bidder 2 is 21.8, bidder 3 is 18.85. The results show the general terms that the PPP modality is value for money under bidder 3, and there will be a saving of 18.85 million over the public procurement. Therefore, there will be value for money and an optimum benefit at bidder 3.
Hello, my name is Ronald Kauka Edward, and I'm going to present the weaknesses of using the PSC in assessing value for money analysis and possible suggestions that can reduce the weaknesses that reside in the adoption of the PSC. The first weakness is inaccuracy. We realize that it's difficult to gather objective data on which to base cost estimates. This therefore makes it difficult to accurately determine the cost of large projects spanning for a time of between, say, 20 to 35 years. Next is the omitted risks. Now we know that some risks involve huge potential effects on project costs, but also great uncertainty. Now these risks are usually difficult to estimate, and one of them is contract renegotiation, especially in the developing world. Next is the no consensus on discount rate. We realize that when we are making comparison between the PSC and PPP project, we normally use present values, and therefore the discount rate is very critical. A high discount rate will favor the PPP project and the comparative gains in the PSC efficiency. However, there has been a challenge on gaining consensus on which discount rate to use. Next is manipulation. Now we know that much of the PSC depends on subjective judgment, and small adjustments in risk or discount rates can have dramatic effects on the cost estimates. Next is the high cost. Now the financial modeling required for the PSCs and PPP references can be enormously expensive and time-consuming. Next is the guessing. Now the PP reference for the pre-bid comparison has been criticized as a futile attempt by government and its consultant to estimate what the private sector will do. Next is the post-bid results storage. Now we know that the bidding process establishes the PPP costs with much more accuracy than the PSC model. And therefore, by the time the bids are received, cancelling the procurement process on grounds that the bid price is high as compared to the PSC costs may be impossible. Next is no public sector alternative. Now the PSC may be hypothetical, but it must refer to a project that can be implemented without private financing. Otherwise, without public financing, the PSC model is largely irrelevant. Below are the suggestions on how to reduce the weaknesses that reside with the adoption of a PSC tool in assessing value for money proposition in delivering public infrastructure projects or services. The first one is that there should no longer be a bias towards private participation, but encourage more open-mindedness towards conventional public procurement. Next is that the systematic tendency for appraisers to be overly optimistic in estimating key parameters for PP projects should be explicitly countered through empirical evidence gathered from past projects. Next is that after bids have been received, there should be no comparison with the PSC, and no questions about the PPP approach is appropriate, but emphasize on getting the most from the deal with the preferred bidder. Also, the quantitative comparison should be considered as just one aspect of appraisal to be used in conjunction with a qualitative analysis that looks at a project's potential distribution effects and track record of similar projects. Thank you.
So as discussed by my colleagues earlier on, it is clear to see that public sector comparator is a key item to consider when it comes to value for money propositions for PPP projects. So managing the risks therein vis-a-vis the socio-economic achievements or desired achievements will be key. Now, based on the project that has been discussed, we conclude as follows. Public sector comparators are intended really to provide a fair means of comparing PP projects and competing bids against public procurement. We need to see what value can be gained through use of public sector comparators as opposed to using public procurement as a means of undertaking different government projects. Now, inherent bias in public procurement, for example, government overheads and other government-related risks like corruption must be estimated and included when coming up with key costs for projects so that the public sector comparator can be in a better position to give viable conclusions with regards to PPP projects. Risk should also be allocated and given values. A sensitivity analysis is key as it provides an indication of the most likely outcome and not only a means of value. This is also key to undertake. The main benefits of PPP is the value added through better construction, operation and maintenance, and risk sharing, basically. So by and large, a public sector comparator is a key tool that can really deliver value for government projects if well executed. Thank you so much. I've been Mitchell Mugera once again.